This summer, when the lilac climbed the porch rail and the clock in Aunt Mae's kitchen seemed to slow for us, I learned to count time by the soft tide of the evening air. We were small enough to believe the house could hold a secret without fear. The garden glittered with dew like a shelled city under early sun. And in that calm, Aunt Mae taught us a ritual of boats on water. Corks carved into tiny ships, a bowl of the river's rain-dark water on the kitchen table, a sheet of paper for names, and a candle that burned low and patient, as if it listened. We would set the boats adrift, one by one, and whisper the names that haunted us, the ones we memorized from old letters, from the harbour's rumour, from grandmother's half-forgotten stories. The harbour, with its far-off creeks and gulls, felt like a place that remembered more than people did. On that summer, a child named Lark belonged to our circle in a way that felt almost ceremonial. Lark had a way of disappearing into a laugh, then reappearing at the edge of your vision, as if stepping out of a dream that refused to end. He was not the strongest or the bravest, but he had a way of turning a small, quiet moment into something that sounded like a promise. We all believed that if we could keep the names afloat, if we could send their echoes into the river's mouth, the river would carry their bodies, their voices, their futures back to us when the night grew soft enough to listen. That summer, Lark vanished in the kind of way a summer vanishes when you blink. There was a night when the harbour's fog slid across the water, as though someone had dragged a pale finger through the air. We stood on the porch, the lanterns bobbing like patient moons along the fence, and Lark spoke of boats not carved from cork, but from memory, of promises not yet made, but already keeping us afloat. We told him to wait a moment, to listen to the river's breath, to watch the boats drift away and carry our names. Then the fog pressed in, thick as a sheet pulled over a body, and by the time the fog wore thin, Lark was gone from sight, from town, from the harbour's size, from everything except the stories we told ourselves about him after. The ritual never stopped being a little lighthouse in the dark. We aged, the porch's wood darkened, the lilacs grew heavier with each summer, yet the boats kept their small, patient course. In Aunt Mae's kitchen, I learned to decipher how a room can listen when you speak a truth you do not know you are telling. The water in the bowl would ripple, even if no breeze stirred it. The cork boats would turn as if the river itself nudged them toward a shore that did not exist. The candles, when they burned low, left a scent of old wax and rain on the air. And in those scents lay the memory of a harbour that refused to forget. Now, many decades later, I live in a house that still smells faintly of lilac, even in December, the wind slipping through the cracks like a patient thief. The house has learned the rhythm of my breath and seems to keep time with the old clock on the kitchen wall, though the clock's hands move with a reluctance that makes me suspect it knows more about time's fragile spine than it ought to. The world outside has grown larger and louder, with trains and voices and the vast ache of life's passing. But inside this house, the ear-pleating quiet remains. It sits with you as if you have never learned to be alone. I do not walk into the past so much as the past brushes against me, like a child's hand on my wrist in the dark, familiar, insistent, that touch that remembers too much. The air in the kitchen still carries the faint scent of lilac and river water, even though the lilacs themselves are long gone. I keep a bowl of water on the table, not because I intend to float boats, but because the surface holds a memory that won't be let go. Sometimes, when I sit with my hands folded in my lap, I think I hear the soft slap of a cork against the bowl's porcelain, the tiny plinking of a boat's wooden hull rolling in a wave that isn't there. In the quiet hours, when sleep seems to forget to come, and the house lets out a slow exhale, a sound travels through the walls. The sound of a small boat's keel skimming the water, even though the basin is dry. It is not loud, not alarming. It is a patient, rain-soft sound, the sort that would go unnoticed if you did not know to listen. And in those moments I am drawn back to that long sun-warmed kitchen, to the way the candles trembled when we whispered the names, and the river's voice came up through the floorboards as though the house itself were listening from beneath. I have grown used to these nights, to the way the house remembers what I have forgotten. I am old enough now to admit that I kept Lark's memory by keeping my own hands steady on the boat's little masts. I kept the ritual alive because to stop would be to admit that the harbour's memory had also claimed something of me I could not afford to surrender. There are days when I find myself counting not the hours, but the boats I would have set afloat, the imagined corks that drift along the edge of the kitchen shoreline, the names carefully penned that I would not dare to lay on a real wave. And I wonder, did we fail to save Lark? Or did we save him from something worse than a disappearing sea? The line between memory and something else, some ache that breathes inside the house, begins to blur when I notice small, almost invisible changes. The wall behind the dining room sideboard seems to have grown a new seam, as if a second room were pressed up against the old one, listening with the same quiet breath as the rest of the house. The seam widens and narrows with my own breathing, and at times I am certain I can hear someone moving within it. The soft shuffle of a child's feet, a whisper of a coat brush the doorframe, a sound like a tiny ship's rope being knotted. It sounds so near that I start to speak to it, as one would speak to a shy animal that might dart away if startled. Lark, I murmur, though I am not sure which of us is addressed, the ghost, the memory, or the old self I wore that summer long ago. One night, after I blow out the candles and set a glass of water beside the bowl, it wears a shirt I remember from childhood, the kind of pale blue that never quite fades, and in its hand it holds a small cork boat, a fragile thing that would have melted in the rain by now. The figure stands beneath the arch that leads to the kitchen, watching me with eyes that are not quite eyes, but the memory of eyes, soft, patient, sorrowful. It does not speak, it simply looks, and then, as if satisfied that I have recognized it, it steps back into the seam in the wall, the seam that grows and shrinks with time, until the figure is gone again, and the wall returns to its